because we are kind of in a space, you could say. This international community that watches these streams every night after night, Center for Political Innovation. We're in a space. Garland Nixon used to be on Sputnik Radio. He's in our space, and I was just on Due Dissidence. They're in our space, and I was just on Academic Agent, and we're in a space of people that you might call anti-imperialists, people who realize that Ukraine is not a democracy and that the United States, shouldn't be fighting for Ukraine to hold it up, right? And that the USA is trying to destroy Russia. People who realize China is not our enemy. People who realize Venezuela is not an awful dictatorship that we just have to invade to liberate the people. We're anti-imperialists. And we realize that behind all of these drives to overthrow governments, whether they're trying to overthrow the government of Iran, trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela, trying to overthrow the government of Burkina Faso or Zimbabwe or whatever, that they are driving to carry out these endless wars, and they're lying to us in order to do it. They lied when they said Ukraine was just a peaceful country, when in 2014 they violently overthrew the Ukrainian government and installed a fanatical anti-Russian government. And that fanatical anti-Russian government started bombing the people in the eastern regions in the Donbass and killing them. And finally, Russia moved in to protect them. They lie to us and say that Iran is the aggressor, when in reality, Iran is a country that has broken free from U.S. domination and is aiding the Palestinians. They lie, and they need these endless wars. The question is why? Why? And I feel like there's not a lot of clarity on why in our spaces. A lot of people say, well, it's just the military-industrial complex. They need to make money. Well, that's true. I mean, war is big business. Lots of money is made from selling the bombs and tanks and weapons. War is a great way to make money, but that's not the main reason. And then, I don't know if people remember years ago, Michael Moore, the liberal filmmaker, he made a film opposing George W. Bush and his war in Iraq. And the film ended with a big quote from George Orwell. This is how the film ended. This is like the last 2 minutes of Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 9/11, won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. And this was like his explanation for why George W. Bush was waging the war on terror and all of that. And he quotes George Orwell. This is kind of the Michael Moore liberal explanation. A lot of libertarians think this kind of thing too. Here we go.
Wage a war to save civilization itself. We did not seek it, but we will fight it, and we will prevail.
George Orwell once wrote that it's not a matter of whether the war is not real or if it is. Victory is not possible. The war is not meant to be won. It is meant to be continuous. A hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. This new version is the past, and no different past can ever have existed. In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society on the brink of starvation. The war is waged by the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or East Asia, but to keep the very structure of society intact.
There's an old saying.
Yeah, and so, that's the quote from George Orwell about war is the health of the state, right? And the idea is that they wage these wars in order to keep power over us, right? Because we all know that during wars, the military is a very authoritarian thing. Wars necessitate authoritarianism, etc. And so the idea is, well, this is about maintaining control. Well, that's not exactly true anymore either, right? Nowadays, we're constantly having wars. From 9/11 to today, we have been at war in multiple countries. First in Afghanistan, then in Iraq, and now how many countries are we currently at war in the United States? We're at war in Somalia. We were at war in Afghanistan for 20 years. We've got troops in Syria. We've got troops in Libya. We can't even keep track of all the countries we're at war with. And we're not in a state of constant military lockdown, actually. War is the health of the state. That doesn't really work either, right? The idea is that in order to keep us, lockstepped and marching behind our leaders, we are at war. That's not actually true either. The foundation of the endless wars that are being waged is economics. Let me repeat that. The foundation of the endless wars that we're in is economics. Economics is something that there is so little knowledge about. So little knowledge about. And people intentionally feel like they can't understand it. They make economics seem like wizardry or magic, right? Alan Greenspan, one of the biggest hucksters and frauds, he used to get on there and talk in this language that no one could understand. And they try to make you think you can't understand economics, but you can. You can understand economics. And if you understand economics, you'll understand why Western societies are breaking down. You'll understand why they need endless wars and how they've kind of backed themselves into this corner. And you'll understand the way out, right? And Rosa Luxemburg, at the beginning of World War I, I've quoted this many times. She said, "This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization." At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but then when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences. The triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization as in ancient Rome. Depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. That was Rosa Luxemburg predicting that what started with World War I and the economic causes of World War I would get to the point that they would have endless wars and Western civilization would start to come apart. We'd see a repeat of the fall of the Roman Empire. She understood this. Rosa Luxemburg studied economics, and she understood why World War I came about. That was rooted in the economy of Europe at the time and how we got to this point. And I am going to help you understand the economic system we live under and why it necessitates constant war. And the first thing I need you to understand is a four-letter word: glut. This word is one of the most important words in the English language right now, and nobody understands it, but it's so important. Glut. G-L-U-T, glut. This is a word that should not exist. What is glut? What is glut? Glut is when the market collapses because there's too much wealth. Glut is when people lose their jobs, businesses go under, people become homeless, people become hungry because there's loads and loads of wealth. Glut. Glut. Glut is a word that should not exist. And it's a word that nobody seems to acknowledge. But glut is the problem that hangs over our economy in our time. The U.S. government buys billions of dollars worth of cheese every year and buries it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri. You can read about the cheese cave. Google it. Why do they do that? It's to keep the price of dairy high enough that the farms don't go under. And it's not just cheese. There's loads of other agricultural products the U.S. government buys and destroys just to keep the price of dairy high enough. And this is a lot of what the U.S. Department of Agriculture does, is purchase products and destroy them in order to keep the prices high. Do you remember when the oil prices dropped under Barack Obama? And all kinds of people in Montana who had moved out to Montana to become frackers lost their jobs. Why? Why did all those people lose their jobs in the oil industry? They'd gone out to Montana. All kinds of people were out there working for oil companies and setting up fracking apparatus out there in Montana, and they lost their jobs. Why? Because there's too much oil. And the price of oil had dropped to the point that it wasn't profitable to frack any longer. Glut is an economic problem created by abundance. And it doesn't make any rational sense. Glut did not exist until the capitalist mode of production. In feudalism, in slavery, in hunter-gatherer civilization, if people were homeless, it was because there was a shortage of housing. In hunter-gatherer civilization, in slavery, in feudalism, if people were hungry, it was because there was a shortage of food. Capitalism, the economic system of capitalism, was the first time in history was really the first time in 1825 where the economy came to a grinding halt because so much wealth had been produced. And this is something that doesn't make any sense, and it is unique to the capitalist mode of production. And at the time that it happened, people were in shock. I mean, this is how the Communist Manifesto describes it, right? In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity, the epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism, and appears as if war, famine, universal devastation had cut off the means of subsistence, industry, and commerce. Why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, and too much industry, and too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by the enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by the conquest of new markets and more thorough exploitation of the older ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises and diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. This is an important concept to understand. The capitalist economy breaks down every few years due to glut, because too much wealth has been created and the people cannot afford to buy it back. And I have shown this video on these streams where I break it down. I show why this happens. The wages paid out in the process of production are never enough to purchase the product that is produced. There's never enough wages paid out in the process of making the pen for the people to buy out the pen, right? As you are putting products into the economy, you're putting wages into the economy. That's spending power, but that spending power is never enough to purchase the product produced. And I will show this great clip that Peter Coffin edited together from one of my talks. This is an important thing to understand.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. Do you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America. So I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I am going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right? If you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated.
I'm sorry. One thing that I mean, it drives me crazy is that whenever I mention overproduction, people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about, they say, oh, well, you know, that just means there's too much stuff. No, that's not what the issue is. The issue is that the more that's created, the poorer people get. The issue is glut. Overproduction is glut. It is the market being saturated with products and the worker not having the spending power to buy them. That's the problem. It's not too much stuff and that's bad for the environment. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. And every time I use the phrase overproduction, some wise guy says, oh, well, yeah, there's just too much stuff. It's bad for the environment. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about glut. We're talking about the market breaking down because so much has been produced and the people cannot afford to buy it back. Okay. And that's why we have to talk about value crisis. We can't even say overproduction because these people who don't know the concept and think, oh, yeah, there's too much stuff. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that the capitalist system has this problem where people cannot buy back what they are producing. And it gets worse because of technology. The more technology advances and reduces the role of the worker at the assembly line, the lower the amount of wages that get paid out and the lower the rate of profit on each item. So they have to churn out even more products, right? And this problem, the more technology advances, the less workers that are hired, the problem gets worse and worse and worse. And this is something that was intrinsic into understanding the problems with the capitalist mode of production, right? The whole mechanism of the capitalist mode of production breaks down under the pressure of productive forces, of its own creations. It is no longer able to turn all this mass means of production into capital. So they lie fallow. And for that very reason, the industrial reserve army must lie fallow, mass unemployment. Means of production means of subsistence, available laborers, all the elements of production and of general wealth are present in abundance, but abundance becomes the source of distress and want. This doesn't make sense. Why should there be poverty because of abundance? Why should there be glut? Well, it's because profit is in command of production, right? Glut should not exist, but it is inherent in the capitalist mode of production, right? And in these crises, the contradiction between socialized production and capitalist appropriation ends in a violent explosion. The circulation of commodities is for the time being stopped. Money, the means of circulation, becomes a hindrance to circulation. All the laws of production and circulation of commodities are turned upside down. The economic collision has reached its apogee. The mode of production is in rebellion against the mode of exchange, which is that we're producing wealth more efficiently than ever, but we have a system where the way you buy things is with money, and it doesn't work, right? That human creativity outstrips the narrow limits of the profit system. And this is the problem with capitalism. It's not that some people are rich and some people are poor, and that's no fair. It's not that workers work in the factory and the factory owner owns the factory, and that's no fair. The problem is that the worker cannot buy back what he produces, and the market gets glutted with products that cannot be sold. And for the first time in history, you have poverty created by abundance. That is the problem, okay? That's the problem. As a matter of fact, since 1825, when the first general crisis broke out, the whole industrial commercial world, production and exchange among all civilized people and their more or less barbaric hangers-on are thrown out of joint once every 10 years. Commerce is at a standstill. The markets are glutted. Products accumulate. As multitudinous as they are unsaleable, hard cash disappears. Credit vanishes. Factories are closed. The masses of workers are thrown into want of the means of subsistence, because they have produced too much means of subsistence. That is the problem with capitalism. So what do they do to resolve this problem? How do they deal with this problem? It happens frequently. They've invented all kinds of mechanisms to try and deal with this problem, but they can't get over it. They have a Federal Reserve Bank that pumps money in and out of the economy. They have a military-industrial complex. They have a Department of Agriculture that buys a whole bunch of cheese and buries it in a cave. They have the food stamps program to keep poor people buying food when they can't afford it. They have all kinds of mechanisms, but they still have this problem, and it gets worse the more technology advances. So how do they get over these crises? And how do the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction. Hear that word, enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by conquest of new markets and more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. So every time they get over a crisis by enforced destruction and by seizing new markets, the next crisis is even harder to solve. This was the world at the time of World War I. Right? This is the map, the colonialism map of the world. All right? And you see the dark blue, that's France. That's big chunks of Africa controlled by France. And the red, the light red, that's England. That's the British Empire that was spread all over the world. Why did capitalism become imperialism? Well, I will show you a quote from somebody who knew a lot about it. Cecil Rhodes. You know what Zimbabwe was called before it became Zimbabwe? It was called Rhodesia. It was named after a British imperialist, a British colonizer named Cecil Rhodes. And this is what he said in 1895. I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday, and I attended a meeting of the unemployed. And I listened to their wild speeches, which were just a cry for bread, bread. And on the way home, I pondered over the scene, and I became ever more convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution for the social problem. in order to save the 40 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population, provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid a civil war, you must become imperialists. Seizing the world and seizing chunks of the world was about dealing with this problem of overproduction. Britain was having economic crises because they produced, too much wool and too much steel and too much textile and all of that. So they seized chunks, they seized India, and they burned all the textile looms of India, and they forced the people of India to import their cloth from Britain. And France was having a bit of a crisis because their industries were coming to a halt. So they seized big chunks of Africa, and they forced the people in Africa to import their products from French corporations. Imperialism is the export of capital, and it became important. In order to keep capitalism going, you had to seize big chunks of the world to dump your commodities onto. It was a way of keeping the economy going, in order to deal with this constant problem of too many products being created and not enough wages being paid out to buy them. And this map is actually not accurate because it has South and Central America like nobody dominates them. Well, read about the Monroe Doctrine. It was dominated by the United States. That was the colonial property of the United States. They may not have been literal U.S. territories, but the USA controlled, they dominated their markets. And China is blank, but China was under the dominion of the British Empire. They nominally had an emperor, but the British ran China, and they forced China to accept the importation of narcotics with the 2 opium wars to seize control of their economy. And that the Western capitalist countries had to seize big chunks of the world and keep them from developing and dump their products onto them and export their corporations all over the world in order to keep the economy going. Imperialism was a necessity. It grew out of the irrational problem of glut. And capitalism, as we understand it, has gone through 4 stages. There are 4 stages of the capitalist mode of production. Hold on. Let me just do something here, right? There are 4 stages of capitalism. The first stage of capitalism was called the primitive accumulation. And that's when they took the feudal commons and ripped them apart and turned them into private property. That's the clearing of the commons. That's the seizure of the Scottish Highlands. That's the French Revolution. That's how they turned feudalism into private property, the primitive accumulation. And colonialism was necessary to make it happen. You could not have had the wealth to create capitalism in Europe without seizing the United States, what is now the United States, from Native Americans, without the transcontinental slave trade, without colonizing Africa, without the Spaniards seizing South and Central America, seizing for themselves. It was colonialism and the privatization and breaking apart of the feudal commons that laid the basis for the modern capitalist economy. That was the primitive accumulation. Out of the primitive accumulation, you got the industrial system, factory owners and factory workers. And that, in the period of industrialization, was when you first had the problem of glut, the problem of overproduction, where the workers couldn't buy back what they were producing. The market broke down because there were too many products that were created. And so out of industrialization, as they continued to have these problems, this problem of overproduction, panics on the stock market, crises, around 1899, 1898, 1900, you got the rise of imperialism. Imperialism was the export of capital, and it was the combination of banks and industries, finance capital, and the rise of huge international trusts, cartels, and syndicates, an international financial oligarchy, the rule of bankers, the old captains of industry, Andrew Carnegie and people like that, became subdued by bankers. The Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Rothschilds, they became the dominant force. Imperialism was the rule of the world by bankers. And that was the third stage of capitalism. And imperialism led to the world looking like this, with big chunks of the world seized by the Western European countries. The Western world, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, They seized big chunks of the world. Belgium seized the Congo and, committed genocide against the people of the Congo, King Leopold's genocide. This is how the world looked in 1914. But even then, it wasn't enough. And in 1914, a huge war broke out among the colonial powers. As you can see, Britain, France, and America are the biggest powers there. And the chunks of the world that are run by Germany and Austria and the Ottoman Empire are quite small. So the Germans, the Austrians, and the Ottomans, the Turks, teamed up to fight against the Americans, the British, and the French. And you had World War I. And World War I was a war like no one had ever seen before. There was machine guns on a massive scale. There was, poison gas, airplane bombing, and 20 million people died in World War I. And that's when Rosa Luxemburg made this prediction. She said the war is a regression into barbarism. And she said that what was going on with World War I was that a crisis of overproduction among the Western colonial powers was being resolved by mass destruction. 20 million people were killed. They were destroying, the European mainland was being just destroyed in mass with, trench warfare and mass killing on a scale. And that this was about resolving the problem of overproduction. And Rosa Luxemburg predicted that, sure, right now, this is just a temporary war, but it's going to get to the point where they need this all the time. And Rosa Luxemburg, even back in 1914, was predicting that we would enter this fourth stage of destructive accumulation. Now, she called it barbarism, but it's actually fascism, right? Fascism. What was Nazi Germany? Nazi Germany was rebooting the German economy. Germany, just like any other Western country, was having a crisis of overproduction. All kinds of people were unemployed. The economy wasn't moving. It was the Great Depression. And they resolved it by destructive mechanisms, by reducing a big chunk of the population to slave laborers, by setting up mass military spending for war. They created the first prison industrial complex with the concentration camp system. They created the first military industrial complex. And with means of destruction, they were able to reboot the German economy for a few years. Fascism is an attempt to deal with the problem of overproduction by kind of centralizing power into one faction and drastically beating down and impoverishing sections of the population and militarizing society in the hopes of stabilizing the economy. Fascism is economic in its nature. This is very important to understand. Fascism isn't people being racist. Fascists are racist in a lot of cases, but people were racist before fascism. Fascism isn't the military. There's always a military. Fascism isn't nationalism. Nationalism's been around for a long time. Fascism is capitalism breaking down into destructive accumulation. It is capitalism trying to reboot itself in the Western countries by engaging in degrowth, by reducing the population to slave laborers, by having constant war and militarism. That's what fascism is. Fascism is the Western imperialist countries breaking down, becoming illiberal and authoritarian, and constantly driving down living standards and destroying the population in order to save their system. Fascism is economic, and that is really important. Fascism is what Rosa Luxemburg was talking about. It's barbarism, right? It is depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. It is a period of unlimited war, and it's rooted in the fact that the capitalist mode of production has to deal with this problem. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is for the economy to be rationally organized, right? I mean, it's pretty basic, right? We need profit to not be in command. This is how Engels put it. When once their nature is understood, they can, in the hands of the producers of working people together, be transformed from master demons into willing servants. The difference is as that between the destructive force of electricity in the lightning and the storm and electricity under the telegraph or the Voltaire arc. It's the difference between a conflagration and fire in the working service of man. With this recognition, at last, of the real nature of the productive forces of today, the social anarchy of production gives place to social regulation of production upon a definite plan, according to the needs of the community and of each individual. Then the capitalist mode of appropriation, in which the product enslaves the producer, and then the appropriator, is replaced by the mode of appropriation of products that is based upon the nature of the modern means of production. Upon the one hand, direct social appropriation as the means of maintenance and extension of production. On the other, direct individual appropriation as means of subsistence and enjoyment. We have to liberate the economy from the chaos of the market, the anarchy of production. And just like we've liberated electricity from being lightning and wild electricity, and we've put it into an outlet so we can plug it in and use it, just like we liberated fire from being wildfires in the woods, and we burn things in order to heat our homes and in order to generate electricity and have power, we need to rationally organize the means of production. Society has got to rationally control and plan the means of production so that this growth can continue, right? We need to overcome the irrationality of the market, and we need to harness the great technological advancement and productive power that human beings are capable of and allow it to create unlimited growth. That is the answer. We need to not have chaos and anarchy of production. We need rational planning of production in order to have unlimited growth. And big sections of the world that used to be under the domination of colonialism, to fight for their freedom, they had to do this. They had to break out of the dominance of colonialism and imperialism. And in order to do that, they had to rationally organize their economy. And they've proven it to be a very, very successful way of doing things. The reason that China continues growing and growing and growing is because they don't have the irrationality of the market. They don't have profits in command. They have a central plan. They have 5-year economic plans organizing production so that growth is no longer restrained by this irrationality, and the state controls and plans out production. There's a lot of private corporations that make money, but they are directed and controlled by society at large. And the wealth of Chinese society has just continued growing because they have a rationally organized and planned economy. I have played this song before on these streams, but it's really awesome. This is the 5-year plan song, right? I love the 5-year plan song, right? I will put it on. The 13th 5-year plan song is awesome. If I can find it on here, it's a great song. And you know, it's awesome in that it shows that their economy is planned. You know, let me put it on for you. I'll put on the 5-year plan song. That's the essence of what socialism is. And this is why I'm on here talking about this, right? They need constant wars because their system is irrational. And they need constant wars. And it's a big problem with the irrational capitalist mode of production. But if we can overcome that and rationally organize production, we won't have this problem and growth can be unlimited. We just need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need society as a whole to rationally organize the means of production. This is how China does it. And this is why they don't have the problems with, you know, poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance that we have.
Hey, have you guys heard what's going on in China?
President Xi Jinping's new style?
Yes, and there's more.
The Shisanu. The what?
China's 13th 5-year plan. Yeah, the Shisanu. Every 5 years in China, man, they make a new development plan. The time has come for number 13. Shisanu, that's what it means.
It's a huge deal. Like how huge?
Huge.
Like China huge?
Yeah, China huge.
Oh, that's really big.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisanu what?
The Shisanu.
But who makes all the plans?
There's government ministers and think tank minds and parties contributing fines. There's doctors, bankers, and farmers, and even engineers who deal with poo.
Ew. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's true. Chorus.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisanu what?
The Shisanu.
But how do they make all the plans?
First there's research views collected, then discussion views projected. Reports get written and passed around.
Then there's actually more research and more discussion and
more research and more discussion, like at every level, over and over, like through hundreds of rounds. It's
Okay, we got it. Hundreds of rounds. Oh my god.
crazy, right?
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Wanna know what China's gonna do? Let's pay attention to the Shisanu.
The Shishan what?
The Shisanu.
But it's not over yet. When the plan comes out, the work's not done. In fact, it's really just begun. Because every province, county, city, too, have got to figure out what they're gonna do. Whoa.
That's a lot to do.
I know.
What's it called again?
The Shisanu. If you wanna know what China's gonna do, pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shishan what?
The Shisanu.
Then the plans keep getting even better. As the plan goes down from high to low, the government's experience continues to grow. They have to work hard and deliberate, because a billion lives are relative.
赵钱孙李周吴郑王冯钱楚魏蒋沈
Chorus! If you wanna know what China's, pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu. Everybody's talking about the Shisanu.
So that's it.
That's it? Yeah, now it's time to get ready for the 14th five-year plan.
What?
Yeah, the Shishu.
The Shisu what?
Yes, that's the problem with capitalism is glut. And the solution is rationally organizing and centrally planning the economy so that growth is unlimited. And that's the issue. And what drives me crazy is the level of discourse in America, because nobody is acknowledging this, right? This is the essence of the debate of capitalism and socialism, is should human labor power and human creativity still be subjected to this irrational problem, or should society as a whole unleash the productive forces in order to enable wealth to be created?